Earlier this year, on January the 24th, my team and I went to interview the man who I like to call Alan Wilder's right-hand man, or Alan Wilder's silent partner, as I sometimes refer to him. He, of course, is Mr. Steve Lyon. And even if you do not know who Steve Lyon is, I can guarantee you've heard music that he's worked on. What follows now is the first of a two-part series, this now being Geek Talk. And in this 40-minute episode, you're going to hear a lot of in-depth information. I really wanted to get under the hood, as I do with all my videos, and find out more about Steve Lyon, who he is. So you're going to hear a lot of interesting stuff and things you've never heard before, including some stories about Alan Wilder, Recoil, and more. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss part 2, which is coming out soon. And in part 2, we're going to focus exclusively on songs of faith and devotion, and you do not want to miss that. Now, usually content like this would only be available on my streaming site, which is watchvg.com, but it has been made possible for you today by our generous backers and sponsors, and I want to thank you, those backers and sponsors, and your names will appear at the end of this video in the credits, so thank you very much for helping make this happen. So sit back, relax, and please do leave your comments in the comment section afterwards. Participate and enjoy. Hi guys, and welcome to Geek Talk, where we talk deep and geek about pianos, keyboards, synthesizers, and music production. I'll take the glasses off for this one. Now, my special guest today needs no introduction really. He's worked with everyone from The Cure, Nitzareb, Depeche Mode, and countless others. You may not know his name, you may, but if you don't, you certainly know his work, and you've probably listened to some of his records. He's been involved with some of the most iconic records of our generation. Mr. Steve Lyon.
Hi. That's a very nice introduction, thank you.
Steve, thanks very much for letting us come over today and
you're welcome.
Commandeer your studio. It's a lovely space.
Thank you.
So I just want to really just talk to you. I want to find out who you are. I think it's interesting so far as music production goes and great records, and you've been involved in many great records. Very often the producers and the engineers, I wouldn't say they don't get the credit, because typically the producers and the engineers often don't want the attention. Depeche Mode is a little bit different though, because especially with the albums they produced, a lot of people even the fans tend to take a lot of interest in, who produced the records and stuff, even if they're not, producers and stuff like that. And that definitely is the case. Now, just full disclosure, we had our recent event in October, which you came down to.
Yeah, right, for Gareth.
Yeah, and that was a lot of fun. And you were asking quite a few questions to Gareth, which some people were going, who is this guy? He seems to know a bit.
Who's this weirdo?
And the funny thing was, when you left afterwards, only then did I sort of say that was Steve Lyon. And the interesting thing was, there were some people, and we won't names drop them here, but they got really, oh my God, that was Steve Lyon. So what that made me realize was, your name is, they know the name, but they didn't know what you look like. It's a bit like the Braveheart movie with William Wallace. And
okay, yeah.
And going off topic. Yeah. And so it just did make me realize that there's a lot of interest in you and what you've done. Hence the reason for commandeering your studio today.
That's right.
So let's just start off with, how did you get into this, and why?
Well, firstly, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I commandeered my cousin's record collection basically, and then sat for hours like anyone, became very obsessed with music, and then moved on to getting my own record collection and stuff like that. And from a very young age, I knew what I would like to do, and I had no idea how I'd get there, or what was what the right path might be. But I knew that I wanted to be involved in music in some way, and it just so happened that, just very briefly, it's like my grandmother used to work at Twickenham Film Studios, which isn't far from here. And Paul McCartney and Wings came over. I was about 11, I think, and my cousin Justine and I went over there, met them, got an autograph, which was just for me, I was already a Wings fan, not so much a Beatles fan, I was a Wings fan. And then realised that, watching them do a video for London Town, that, this might be interesting. And I thought that maybe, doing video or doing sound, I mean, I didn't know if I wanted to get into, I didn't really know what a recording studio was. Anyway, so I was then invited to go through actually a friend of my grandmother's to Beaconsfield and the National Film and TV School. And I went as kind of like, a very enthusiastic helper, but always kind of, attracted towards sound and sound effects. And basically, at my time there, I did kind of, all kinds of stuff, focus pulling, I did lighting, and, then got into, doing a few sound effects and things like this. And they gave me this Nagra reel-to-reel tape machine that I took home basically, and recorded all this kind of stuff that they used on a couple of films that I was involved in. And then I just got introduced to an actress whose boyfriend was in a band being produced by Glyn Johns. Glyn Johns, way back in the day, done Led Zeppelin 1, did work with the Beatles. I mean, have you ever seen the Get Back?
Yeah.
For me, that was brilliant to see him as a young man involved in that. Was excellent. And then they did that at Twickenham Film Studios. Part of it was done at Twickenham Film Studios. And then John Hyatt, John and my trading The Who. Who's Next? I was very aware of Who Next, one of my favourite records. And much to my surprise and delight, he took me on as an assistant. And it was basically sit in the back of the room, watch what I do, and then as soon as we're ready to do stuff, get up and get involved, kind of thing. So listening to the conversation with him, with the artist, and they'd say, well, we're going to overdub some acoustic guitar, and then I was like out the door into the live room, getting the mic ready and all this kind of stuff. And I was just in awe of him because he had a studio in his house, which was very unusual in those days. He had a custom-made console, and I would just absorbed the vibe, absorbed what he was doing, and just at the time I was aware that I was in a very privileged position. Don't get me wrong, to be given this opportunity, very green behind the ears kind of thing, but learnt an enormous amount from him, and then just carried on from there. He after I was with him for about 2 years, I think, and then he went off to do record production somewhere, and he was friends with Sir Richard Branson, who owned Virgin at the time, and then owned some studios in London. And I was given an interview at the Townhouse, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, in Hammersmith, and went down there. I was an assistant there for a little while, worked with Hugh Padgham, again, one of my production sound heroes. I'm a big fan of Peter Gabriel 3, which he engineered, which I still think is one of the most amazing records. And then went on to the Manor, and subsequently decided to go on tour with a band that I'd worked with at the Manor Studios in Oxford, which was a big country house. Actually, I think it was Richard Branson's old house, actually. And random incidents, for example, I was a fan of Rush at the time, Canadian band. They'd just done Moving Pictures, and I'd been to see them twice, so I had like a bit I can't quite remember, I had some time off. So I went to see them play at Wembley, like 2 nights on the trot. And then I went back to the studio, and I walked into Geddy Lee, who's the guitar, bass player, keyboard player. Just like, kind of, what are you doing here? I just saw you play.
Surreal, yeah.
Yeah, it was there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. I walked into the middle of a Simple Minds session at the Townhouse as well. So, I very quickly had to adapt, because what Glyn was doing was still very much in a everything live, everyone played together. And then when you go into the Townhouse, and, as they were modern studios then, you're then doing it separately. Yeah. Which I could never really get my head around, but that's another
the multi-track thing. I think
kind of doing drums on their own, just for the click, and no one's really vibing out. And, everything very measured, which wasn't the way really with Glyn. He was all about the vibe, and I'd like to think that I still keep that as a fundamental principle, really.
The vibe is something. Yeah, so you came onto that. That is something. It's very interesting, and this is Geek Talk. But something I've learned, and through this channel, I've had the privilege of meeting some of my my heroes and great producers, and something they all have in common is they never talk technically. They always talk about the vibe. Gareth's the same. It's like I know Connie Plank, who's one of
genius,
apparently, as people always say, genius, but apparently he wasn't that technical, or he probably was, but his emphasis was never on the technical. It was always the vibe, and we hear this a lot. I always want to bring this out to the community, to the up and coming producers. There, vibe is so important.
Yeah, it's something very difficult to pinpoint because there is no magic vibe button.
Yeah,
I think you create it with the people, and you feed off that enthusiasm. I think it's more enthusiasm, really.
Yes.
And then it's controlled enthusiasm and filter it towards what you're trying to create. And sometimes those paths are not easy, but if you can capture a certain element and then really make the most of it, I think that's what you're there for. And my job as an engineer was or as an assistant even, you were starting off making sandwiches and tea and making sure they were good sandwiches and tea, and then you move on to becoming an engineer and learning a lot, and you try and encompass bits of that learning and kind of bolt them all together. But even in you think of vibe, you think of like, I don't know, like Led Zeppelin or Crosby, Stills and Nash, or classic bands, and then you move it on into certain things that I was very privileged to work with, who are much more electronic, but you're still trying to capture those kind of random elements and bolt them together. And then I think that once you've got that, then everything else that you bolt onto it works.
Yes.
Because the core element is good, and you don't really lose that vibe, if you want. So when I'm in this studio and I'm working with all kinds of different bands, and generally I set them all up live. I don't think I ever do anything where I don't set a band up live, to be honest, even if they're not used to it. But the excitement and the bounce that you get off that, I mean, for me personally as a fan of music and for the band, it's that individual element that you can't get from a plug-in or from a virtual instrument.
And this is something we'll speak about in more detail when we do our segment on songs of faith and devotion, which I think the fanboys and fangirls there are dying to hear about. It's very interesting if we look at and we'll talk about it later, but the earlier days of Depeche, where everything was kind of layered, programmed. When they got to the SOFAD period, it was recording things live, and a completely different way of working. But as I say, we'll come to that. One of the things you can probably agree with here, Steve, is you probably often hear demos that sound amazing. When people go into demo mode, they go, here's the demo, and then they do the finished record, and then there's so much precision and wanting to make this sound good that they lose the vibe of the demo. Is that something you could...
I think there's a common thread, illness, if you want to call it that. It's called demoitis.
Correct, yeah. That's a well-known saying.
I'm sure, it's like other engineers and producers would come across it. And you get so used to hearing something in a certain way that anything outside of that then seems alien. And that's a step that you have to deal with. I've dealt with that many times. But that's the faith that people have in good producers like Flood, for example. Taking Martin's demo and then having a vision, and Alan as well, obviously having that vision, and that is a very particular skill. But yeah, I get demos sent to me in all random forms. So I say to bands, well, I haven't got a demo. Okay, well, just send me something in the rehearsal room, because they somehow feel that you've kind of
got to have it all spelled out.
You've got it. Yeah, and I was like, no, not really.
It's just the general idea.
Because when it is so, when a demo is so set in stone, then that is when anything, as I said before, anything that's slightly out of that sometimes feels random or unwanted to the person who's worked their arse off creating this piece of music. But I think that I've been fortunate to work with people that trust me enough where they kind of go, "I'll fling it at Steve and see what he gets up to," So I love that personally.
And I think as an engineer as well, with probably more psychology than Geek Talk, but I mean, I think that you probably know that as an engineer, you have to be like, especially when you were recording a band, a lot of egos involved. So you have to be quite diplomatic. You have to kind of be like almost like the uncle, the father. You've got to wear all these different hats. How do you find that to be diplomatic? And
I think, me, I'm not a draconian kind of person anyway. So I think that I'm pretty good reader of character, with bands in particular. I just from experience, and people come to me fortunately because they like me and they want to work with me. So you already have that kind of level one of trust, if you know what I mean. And then kind of you have to work out the relationships within the band, and then kind of infiltrate that somehow, but in a very casual way if you want. But then you just have to learn how people are, and then I think that once but what they're searching for initially anyway, in my opinion, is they're looking for direction.
Yes, they're
looking for focus. So you say to them, okay, right, well, we're gonna, either I've been in rehearsals with them, so we've sorted out stuff before, or if they come into the studio off the back of a demo and it's the first time that we've been in a room together, you go, right, okay, well, you're going to be in here and you're going to be in there, and this is how we're going to do it, and even though they may not be used to it, once they've got that focus, then you're able to kind of put them at ease. And I think that for me personally, one of the reasons why I randomly found this studio through this band Suzerain that I did 2 records with, and setting up the studio, and I never really thought I wanted a studio, but the record industry was changing and I needed a space, but having your own place and kind of setting it up how you like it eases people into that environment, because they see that you're happy, that again, the atmosphere, the vibe of the building, and the room, and it just your job really is to try and put them as at ease as possible, but again with a kind of we're going to focus on this, we're going to do it like this, and or at least you're going to try it like that, and I'm talking about like band all playing live. Doing other forms of music is a bit different, but once you get them in that environment that they're comfortable with, and then they're fine, and then you're supposed to be recording the first song and they're jamming, you've kind of got there.
All right, Steve, so I just want to talk about a few common rules and laws and misconceptions in the modern music way. I'm sure you've heard it a lot. I mean, you probably just turn on YouTube and you see a lot of experts and stuff like that. You probably sit there and go, yeah, whatever.
I have to say I don't watch any of that stuff.
I'm sure.
I'm sure there's a lot of it out there. So I don't really watch it.
So let's just talk about work practice at the moment. You've just brought this your mixing console. You just had that brought that back in, and so it's fair to say you're a pretty hands-on. You're not mixing in the box, so to speak.
Actually, quite the opposite. No,
you're in because this is a controller.
This is just like a big mouse.
So you're in the box.
Yeah, I pretty much. I mean, I've got a selected amount of gear, and I don't have a lot of gear because I have this goes back to I guess working with Glyn Jones. When I went into his studio, he didn't have the console, but he didn't have a lot of outboard gear. and I questioned him a few times, and I remember, they brought a plate in, they brought, Drama gates in. Anyone who knows, about that kind of stuff and know what I'm talking about, and bits of equipment. But he was like, well, if I'm not using it, I don't need it. So I guess I don't need the arm around my shoulder of lots of gear to make me feel good. I'd rather use well what I have, because that's all I need. I'm not being superficial or lovely bits of kit. Great, brilliant, but I don't really need that much. So with this, for example, this is an older Avid console, which Avid generously in their upgrades, it doesn't work with the new versions of Pro Tools, so you have to buy a bit of hacked software to make it work, which is classic Avid, which is very annoying. But I like it. It's pretty simple. It's kind of it's what I need.
So you're working on Pro Tools?
Yeah, I kind of moulded myself into Pro Tools. I mean, back in when I first started using computers, which was I guess working with Depeche, like the early times with them. I'd never really worked with consistently every day with computers. I mean, Martin used to have a BBC computer.
That's right.
Developed by the BBC, which was quite interesting. And then using Cubase, and then from there I moved on to Logic, and then I when things were starting to kind of move on or move away from you being given the tapes to then mix, and you were given files, a lot of it was in Pro Tools. So I then moved on to Pro Tools. Not I dislike Pro Tools, but it was just, I kind of got to learn this, because if I don't, then I don't really want someone else to do it, for me and then tell them what to do. I want to get my hands in it, so I get my hands dirty that way. It's, I mean, you develop as you go along. I mean, the great thing about it is that if you're mixing something and you kind of get bored, or you can't really hear what you're doing anymore, or you just want to leave it and come back to it, which is usually what I do, then it's brilliant, because immediately you hit the go button, there you are, and it's back exactly as it is. So, and because I move around quite a lot, I don't have external reverbs, for example, that I use during mixing, because I'm usually not in the same place. So again, I use limited amount of plugins and stuff like that.
Well, I think there's this huge nostalgia that often comes from the younger guys. They're like, oh, you put it onto tape and stuff, and you often hear the older guys going, if you knew how hard it was to work with tape, you'd love this kind of thing. And I think all the conveniences. Also, I mean, that I used to work in a turnkey back in the days.
Oh, yeah.
I was a salesman then. This is 1999, and I remember that was the first time I heard the word plug-in. Because this is when the the plug-in, and this is when plugins and stuff were kind of in their infancy, and it was kind of like if you got a plug-in off whatever piece of gear, it was more of a token. It wasn't quite the real. Fast forward to today, the A/B comparisons are just so accurate. So there's no real need to be so purist about.
No, I mean I do bow to those who have greater knowledge than myself about certain plugins. I still have a very high degree of skepticism, put it that way, when I see a really lovely looking picture of a Manley, limiter, compressor or whatever, and I'm kind of fiddling with it, and I think do I know the difference? Probably not, but I want the knobs, man.
Hands on.
I want to because there's something about manipulating things in a random way that you can't do with a push of a mouse. And when you're in a fortunate position to be able to do that, I think you learn a bit more about the bits of kit. Now that's not detriment to people that make top quality plugins, for the Manley or for other bits of kit. But I guess I was in a fortunate position where that's how I grew up. That's how I learned to use them. So, when I use simple things like a Uri compressor or something like that, then I'm like both hands on the input and the output, and I'm kind of fiddling about.
Yeah.
Which obviously you
can't do on a mouse. Yeah.
You can't do that with a mouse, and so I prefer, if I can, but definitely with recording.
Yeah.
To use a limited amount of real gear that I like, and that gets me what I want to hear. Yeah.
Well, Steve, just obviously look, and back to what you said earlier on. I often, there are a lot of people in the Geek Talk community. I'm not going to mention them. I always like to say, tons and tons of gear, but not a single original idea. And I've often found the guys who are doing the best stuff, they've got no gear and stuff. And we've seen this when we interviewed, Dave Bascombe as well. He had, you go there's Geek Talk and you're thinking, oh, Dave Bascombe, we're going to do all this filming. Nothing there, but it's functional and it works. And
he's a brilliant engineer, producer as well, so that helps.
No, absolutely. And so everything's streamlined. So I just want to sort of just make mention of a few of your setup at the back there. Can you just explain to us what you've got there?
Well, I mean, it all kind of starts with this, which is a 16-channel Manley valve mic pre. So when I'm doing my drums, everything will go through there, and I have it wired the way I like it. So I mean, I do have a patch bay, which is this patch bay called a Gail Metti, which is
Italian.
I don't actually know, but interesting name. But the good thing is it's got it's quite unusual. It's got a 3-pin connector, and they're gold plated, but I mean they're definitely treated, and it just sounds brilliant. So there's no detriment like the old Bantams or whatever. There's always get like crackles and bangs. So you don't get any of that with this. And so it for example, the bass drum and the snare drum, usually I've got 2 bass drum mics, 2 snare drum mics, so it goes through the Manley first, then it goes through the API, which is the EQs are up there. I don't know if you can see them, and then the snare drum will go through this AMEC. Now AMEC was the company that Rupert Neve was a console manufacturer of probably the best consoles in the world, and that was his follow-on company, and he designed this, and I just love the sound of this, but I love the options on it as well. We don't really get that when 1176. You've got the input and the output, and that's it. Whereas this, you can randomise it a bit more, so I quite like that.
So is that sort of comparable to the 1176, albeit a different thing?
It's just toys for boys really. I mean, it depends on what you prefer. I do have a couple of 1176s actually, but they're out being repaired, which is one of those things. Sometimes, depending on what I'm recording, because my live room, I like the sound of it, and I'll put them through this Neve here, which is one of the modern kind of mic amp Neves, but again I love the sound of it, and I have these Uris here, which are to me some of the best EQs in the world, just absolutely fantastic, the 545s. Again, I fiddle about, depends what I'm recording, but definitely bass. I wouldn't put vocals through them, but anything organic, guitars, again, bass drums, snare drums sound amazing through there.
So recording,
that's pretty much it really.
Recording with a lot of, as I say, and as you say, it's good to have just a few things that you're going to use, and they're premium stuff. So record through there. How about mixing? When you're mixing afterwards, do you do any like analog summing or anything on the way out?
Well, I used to have a Manley limiter compressor, which I loved, but because I was moving around, and I mix it, basically in the box, that I was never, I couldn't always have it. So if I did something at the studio and then I went to the artist and I was in their facility and they didn't have one, then I'd be like, oh, okay, it's got to go through the Manley. So in the end, I was like, well, I'd rather, as good as it is, I'll use one of the Waves plugins, which are amazing, and I'll use that. Now, again, that's maybe a slight compromise between nice big fat valve gear,
Yeah.
and a plug-in. But just because of the nature of the way I work, it was just more convenient to do it that way.
But you've also, because you operate between here, we're in England now, obviously, and in a secret location, and Italy as well.
Yeah.
So you've got a studio in Rome.
No, I've got a desk space.
A desk space. Oh, okay.
No,
So,
I don't have a studio there because really the stuff is in Italy is I will record it here.
I see.
And then I spend a bit of time in Italy, and when I'm there, obviously I've got to work. So
This is the studio. You don't have a studio.
No, I don't have a studio.
Oh, okay.
I don't really want one.
Okay, yeah.
But the other thing is I don't really need one.
Yeah.
So I've got a very trusty set of Sony headphones that I've been mixing with for a very long time. And I've got used to that, and I guess I get my results.
Of course, you said that mixing through headphones used to be sacrilege, but of course it's it's accepted now with a lot of.
I've been doing it for a really long time.
Yeah.
Actually, the guy that turned me onto it, funnily enough, was Francois Kevorkian.
Yes.
And exceptional, engineer mixer. And I'd never really seen anyone do that before. So I was working with Depeche, and they were doing the mixing started the mixing for Violator, and we were upstairs at the church. And then I was curious because I'd never worked with him before, and also to see someone like working on stuff that you'd worked on. And then I'd go downstairs and it would be kind of deathly quiet, and there was Francois with a set of headphones on. I was like,
it was said on the interviews, and we'll get to our Depeche section later on. You don't want to miss that one. I think Daniel and them said it was very frustrating because he was in the corner with some headphones working on a hi-hat for like 2 weeks, but it was a very good hi-hat afterwards. He was very sort of like into that, and I know Gareth Jones is also very big onto the headphones. It's not a taboo. Taboo's not the right word, but there was a point, certainly about 20 years ago, like, oh no, you got to mix on speakers and stuff like that. And I think the way it's all changed now. Because I don't know really. They both have their place, don't they? I mean, headphones are great for sort of like finer details and things like that. I think it's just translation. Make sure it sounds good on as many playback systems.
I found it. When I was talking to Francois about it, the reason he did that is because he knew the headphones so well, so that when he was moving between studios, he had this one fixed thing, one reference point. Yes. Because even if these Adams, for example, which I love, these monitors. So even if you have your set monitor, you put it in a different room, it's going to sound different.
Yes.
But when you've got the headphones,
it's perfect. Yeah.
It pretty much. I mean, it depends on the amp you're using or one thing or another, but the signal path. But generally, you're pretty much there. So I kind of took that and went, oh, that's a brilliant idea. Why didn't I think of that before? So again, moving around to different studios, I would always have my headphones, and then I could reference it and go, okay, well, I know it's too much bass because it's I can hear it in the cans, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that is always the thing with mixing, is it's what you're used to. It's like you're used, as you say, if you put these speakers in a different room, they're going to sound different. So when you got the headphones, they're always going to sound. Once you're used to that sound, you're used to that.
Yeah,
sound.
and you kind of, you're then able to have a reference point. I mean, listening to records you love, Peter Gabriel 3 or Steely Dan or something like that. You listen to it and you think, oh, I've kind of got it. Okay, that's where it should be. But it's not quite like that.
And obviously, just since we've gotten you've mentioned Peter Gabriel a lot. Are you a fan by any chance?
Yeah, just slightly. Yeah, slightly. Yeah.
And you've just spoken about you've heard his last single.
Yeah.
And any thoughts?
I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly now. Yeah, the first single off the new record. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, and because you were talking about an album earlier, which was
Peter Gabriel 3. I think is it's very difficult to say favourite album, but I think it's the album that I've listened to the most, and I just think it's just a work of genius. I mean, not only the songs are just incredible, the sound of it, the ideas, the flow of the record, everything to do with it. It's like someone might pick a Zeppelin album, or someone might pick a Bowie album, or it's just that album that hit me just at the right time. And I was a fan of Genesis anyway, and then hearing that, I was just like, Can I swear?
Would that be? Would that? I'm just trying to sort of get my head around sort of like your workflow. Let's say, for instance, if you were mixing an album, you obviously, or would you use reference material? Is that do you have certain reference records that you go to sometimes just to get your ears used to a mix or something?
Not really.
Not really. Okay.
I think my thing is that when someone says, would we really want you to work on this, or can you do this? I always think, I'd like to. If they have anything, I'd like to hear it or go into rehearsal and think. And I think, well, what would be my role? What could I contribute? And it's very much. I know it's a well-worn phrase, but it's not my record. So I can suggest stuff, and I can point them in the direction that I think is relevant. If in the end of the day they take a different decision, then that's really up to them, because it's their music, it's not mine. And I kind of try and stick to that principle. When I think that they're making the wrong decision, then obviously I'll fight my corner, but not to the point where it's my way or the highway. But I think when I'm mixing stuff that I've recorded, I already have a game plan in mind.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult sometimes, to verbalise that. So basically, I like to mix with the artist isn't there. Not because I don't want them around, but I don't want them around.
Sometimes you just want
because you're when you're dealing with the process, and it's a technical process. Sometimes you're kind of getting all your buses together, and you're arranging the tracks, and
you don't want a backseat driver there.
Yeah, going, I really want it to sound like so and so. It's like, okay, but when I get to the point when it's ready to listen, then that's fine. And I've always been a bit like that. I think the only person that I wasn't like that with, and for obvious reasons, was Alan Wilder.
Okay, Steve. So yes, please do continue with the Alan Wilder story.
Well, you're mentioning about mixing and the obviously with the Depeche stuff, but also with the Recoil thing. I think when you're working with someone that has such a unique vision and a unique kind of style, you just tend to sponge it up. So when it came to mixing the Recoil stuff, for example, I knew Alan pretty well by then, but he also knew me. So when we were sitting in the room together, he just kind of let me get on with it. But I knew that he would, and when he did have something to say, obviously I would listen, because we're mates and you were trying to get the same result. But it was always a really valid point. So that's what I mean by that, is that someone would interject positively in about something he didn't like, or positive about something that he did like, and then you'd kind of work on it together. And I think there's very few relationships that are so symbiotic that I've been involved with. And even now, Alan hasn't really done very much in the last few years for his own reasons, which is fine. But I'll send him stuff, and it's a bit like headmaster check. He's I fucked up here. What do you think, kind of thing. Have you got me? Got any pointers? I mean, it happens every now and again, just because. Firstly, because I'd like to entice him into doing something again.
Will would.
Because I would very much like to work with him again. Yeah. So I think it's a double-edged kind of thing there, and I'm not shy about saying that. But also because I just enjoy his feedback. So the last stuff that I sent him, I worked with this band in London. I found in London called Suzerain, and I did 2 records with them. And the first record was unsigned. I just love the band. And I saw them play live with The Model, who were on Fletcher's label. That's how I kind of found them.
Was that Toast Hawaii when it was called?
Oh, I couldn't say.
Probably that, yeah.
So, working on that with Suzerain, and then the band, we did 2 records, and then the band they didn't split up because we all had kids basically. So I was like, focus on other things. But I'm doing a record with the singer Tom, and it's called Karaoke, and it's something that I'm very proud of, and I think Tom's an amazing songwriter, singer. But he'll give me his stuff and just kind of throw it at me, and kind of go, right, here's the raw files, kind of do what you want. And I remember that the first couple of things that I did, I was like, I wonder what Charlie thinks of it, you know. I sent it to Alan, and he kind of, you know, pointed out, what did I think of that? That's a really great idea, you know. So it's nice to be able to bounce that off, but I don't want to bug him all the time, you know.
Yeah, of course. And as my community are watching this interview, people are going to say to him, ask him where Alan is and what's he doing, kind of thing. And so I'm not going to ask you that. So, let's go on to the next question.
I wouldn't answer it anyway.
Exactly. But that is something, and we'll talk more about that in the SOFAD interview. It's something that I in the community feel very strongly about. It's just someone that has had such a profound effect on a positive effect on our lives through the records he's done. For a man like that to just disappear from everything and be so anonymous, people are just going, wow, where is he? So he's become a legend and an enigma and everything, and
rightly so.
Yeah, and rightfully so. But Martin often also spoke about, he said, having Alan was like having a teacher who could kind of use like that final quality control that could check up and go, no, that's not right. And
okay, I didn't know Martin had said that about him, but
yeah, so it was similar to what you said. Yeah.
I mean, my relationship with Al would obviously be different to Martin's, but I think, you know, there's a few people that I feel that way about, but particularly with Alan, because, you know, we worked on some really interesting stuff and really interesting material and stuff that I'm intensely proud of, and then to move that on, you know, to doing records with him. It was good fun, you know. At the end of the day, it was good fun, and I learned a lot. Yeah, it is a shame that he's decided not to carry on doing stuff, but I respect his decision. It's really up to him.
And of course, the Recoil project was so groundbreaking, and I think a lot of people don't get it. What I mean by that is, you know, because it's not song based. It's more concept music and stuff. But yeah. I've said this on my channel before, and I say this to the producers: if you're, depending on your record, but if you're working on a record and you want to make yourself feel suicidal, just put on a Recoil record. Just, you know, I don't know how
Charlie would feel about that
as well. You know what I mean? And I mean that in a positive way. I don't mean it. It's just when you put your record on, you go, okay, I think mine's sounding good now. Let's pull up the reference tracks, and you put on a Recoil one. You go, I suck. You know, what I'm just trying to say is, sonically, what you guys did there is just. It's something that I'm actually fanboy. Bring on the signs. I'm getting goose flesh. What do you guys say? Goose pimples. I say goose flesh. But it is something that just the sound of it and everything is amazing. I'm thinking of that one Incubus. Every time I'm in the jungle.
Oh yeah, with
it's just
from Nitzreb.
Yeah,
I'm embarrassed. I can't remember his name. But yeah, it just Douglas McCarthy. Fantastic voice. He did it's Charlie Sheen, right? He did that just so well. But the intensity,
Martin Sheen, yeah.
Yeah, but
it was Martin Sheen from Apocalypse Now.
Yeah,
it's Martin Sheen.
Okay,
sorry,
so it was his son, right?
Yeah.
But it was. Yeah, sorry, Martin Sheen from Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just think the vibe, you know, is the vibe of that Recoil stuff is so intense.
It's very dark though. And it's not.
It's
not trying to be dark.
No, it just is.
It just is, and it's just.
It was. I was kind of surprised, and still am, that no one has kind of stumbled across it and gone soundtrack.
Hello. Well, I can just say that there are so many comments on all my videos going, why has Alan not been asked to do movie soundtracks? Maybe he has. I don't know, but it's just. Sonically, this stuff is just great.
Quite possibly, I'd be surprised if he hasn't. I mean, not that he's mentioned it to me, but I mean, I'd be surprised if he hasn't. But you know, the stuff that Trent has done for
Yeah.
the Trent Reznor.
Yeah.
With again, I can see his name. I can't remember, but Atticus, right?
Oh yeah.
And brilliant stuff, really great stuff. And that would be a relationship that I'd like to see. I'd love to see Trent and Alan do something together. That would be really, really interesting. And for years, I've been, because they're both fans of each other's music.
Yes.
I mean,
a lot of people have.
Alan might correct me on that, but I believe he is. Yeah.
It's funny. A lot of people have actually said that as well. The Trent Allen collaboration and stuff. But as I say, I would love to really one day, time permitting, come back and just talk about the Recoil stuff. As a because that is just it's really, really as I say. Well, Steve, as I say, I could sit here all day and as you can see, and you're a great conversationalist, so I don't want to keep you too long. Can you just sort of tell us just quickly, typically the kind of bands you work with? Are they mainly rock bands? Is it mainly electronic bands? A combination of things?
It really is a combination.
So who
of stuff.
usually approaches you typically? What type of bands?
Well, I get two kinds of approaches. One, because I've got the studio, so I get bands mostly unsigned that just want to record. And then, my basic thing is, okay, well, I'm not just going to record anybody. I want some form of demo or, come for rehearsal or something like that. Mm-hmm. I do, random mixing, various kind of projects. Some of those are Mode fans that, that ask me to get involved.
So you're busy.
I'm not. I haven't got any days off.
That's great. Well, listen, as I say, this is great, and of course, it's Panic Button Studios, and you've got the great live room there, which we'll film just now and say. And we'll leave your links in the description below. If anyone wants to contact you or reach out to you.
Thanks.
Mr. Steve Lyon, guys, you do not want to miss the next episode, which is all about songs of faith and devotion. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.